Sing, the mental reality of New York's historic prison. For nearly 2 centuries, there's been a place just north of New York City where time doesn't simply pass. It presses on you. A place where footsteps echo louder because every man walking those corridors knows he's entering a world that has swallowed over 600 lives and reshaped thousands more. Sing is not just a prison. It is a psychological battlefield. Behind its stone walls, inmates speak of a transformation, not the kind told in rehabilitation brochures, but the kind that happens when you sleep a few cells away from where the death house once claimed its victims, and when the same institution that delivered executions also pioneered some of the most radical reform programs in American corrections. This is the story of a prison built on contradictions. A place where fear could break a man, or force him to rebuild himself from nothing. This documentary contains descriptions of prison conditions and violence for educational purposes based on verified sources. Viewer discretion is advised. For more deep research of prison documentary like this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Welcome to Sing, the mental reality of New York's historic prison. The weight of a name. Sing carries a name that feels heavier than the stone from which it was built. Mention it in New York and people lean in, not out of curiosity, but because the place has lived in the public imagination for generations. Its history is older than most American institutions, and its psychological footprint stretches far beyond the Hudson River. For inmates, Sing isn't just a destination on the prison bus. It's a mental shift. Men describe feeling it before they even reach the gate. The silence, the gravity, the sense that everyone who enters becomes part of a legacy they never asked for. Some come in hardened, convinced nothing can shake them. Others try to convince themselves they'll adapt quickly. But inside these walls, the mind is tested in ways no intake paperwork can measure. This facility has witnessed transformations that textbooks never capture: the collapse of ego, the birth of purpose, the unraveling of guilt, and the strange clarity that emerges when a man's world shrinks to a concrete box. Sing has broken people. It has also rebuilt them. And in its long, paradoxical existence, it has become a place where psychology matters as much as security. From the notorious death house to programs that redefined rehabilitation, every chapter of Sing's story reveals something deeper about human survival when a man's freedom is stripped away but his consciousness remains wide awake. And to understand what Sing truly is, we have to start at the beginning, nearly 200 years ago. Welcome to Sing. Long before Sing became a headline, it was a construction site carved out of hard limestone on the banks of the Hudson River. The year was 1825, and the first inmates arrived not as prisoners in cells, but as laborers forced to build the very prison that would soon confine them. Every swing of the hammer, every block they set in place, tied them to a structure that would outlive generations. From the moment a man steps through its gates today, that history still pulses beneath his feet. Officers don't have to explain the rules. The walls do that on their own. The air is thick with the feeling that thousands have stood in the exact same spot, wondering the same thing. What will this place turn me into? Sing compresses life in a way no one prepares for. A man who spent years moving freely suddenly finds his world reduced to precise steps: how he walks, where he stands, when he breathes in other people's air. Every sound becomes a signal. Every silence becomes a question. That's how the place works. It forces you to notice things you never cared about before. Some inmates describe the induction as mental freefall, the sensation of dropping into a place where the outside rules no longer apply. Others say the first night is the worst, not because of fear, but because the mind finally understands that everything familiar has been severed. The noises of the cell block, the weight of the door, the voices in the dark, all of it becomes part of the brain's attempt to adjust, to defend, to survive. Even the officers feel the psychology of the facility. Many admit that Sing isn't a job you simply leave at the gate. It follows you home, into your head, into your dreams. That's what 200 years of human struggle does to a place. It changes everyone who enters, no matter what uniform they wear. And this is only the beginning. 200 years of history. 2 centuries is a long time for any institution to stand, But for a maximum security prison, it's practically unheard of. Sing Sing didn't just survive, it evolved, absorbing every era of American punishment like rings in a tree trunk. Each generation left behind a psychological imprint that still lingers in its corridors. In the 1800s, Sing Sing was defined by calculated discipline. Silence wasn't a rule, it was a weapon. Inmates marched in lockstep, heads down, speaking only when permitted. The idea was simple: break the spirit, and the behavior will follow. But what reformers didn't understand was that silence can become its own kind of chaos. When a man is forced into quiet for too long, his mind starts speaking louder than any guard ever could. Some inmates found clarity in that forced stillness, others unraveled. By the early 1900s, Sing Sing had transformed again. It became a symbol, feared, infamous, and impossible to ignore. The prison's reputation wasn't just built on violence or escape attempts, but on its sheer presence. Newspapers called it a place where hope goes to die. And for many, that wasn't hyperbole. Yet even then, in the midst of brutality and tight control, there were whispers of a different vision, that punishment could coexist with redemption. Mid-century brought major reforms. Warden Lewis Laws, one of the most influential figures in American corrections, used Sing Sing as a testing ground for ideas no one had dared to try inside a maximum security facility. He introduced education, theater programs, and even inmate-produced newspapers. For the first time, the prison felt like a place where a man might redefine himself instead of simply endure his sentence. But progress never comes without tension. As rehabilitation grew, so did resistance. Old guard officers resented the changes. Some inmates viewed them with suspicion. A prison with a legacy as dark as Sing Sing's doesn't transform smoothly. It fractures, then slowly reshapes itself. Through it all, one area of the prison remained untouched by reform, a chamber where rehabilitation had no place, and where Sing Sing's darkest history was cemented. The death house. There is a part of Sing Sing that even seasoned officers hated walking past. A place inmates whispered about long after the lights went out. For decades, it was the most feared corridor in New York's prison system, the death house. Men didn't stumble into this unit by accident. They were escorted there slowly, deliberately, step by step, as if the building itself wanted them to understand that they were crossing into a different world. The door that separated the rest of the prison from the death house wasn't just metal, it was psychological. Inmates described hearing it close behind them like a final verdict. Inside, the atmosphere was different. Still air. Narrow halls. Cells arranged in a way that forced every man to face the same direction, toward the room where the electric chair waited. That chair even had a name, Old Sparky. Over 600 executions took place here, each one adding another layer of memory to a space already thick with fear. But the death house wasn't chaos or noise. It was order, chilling, precise, controlled. The rituals were designed to remove panic, to replace raw fear with quiet inevitability. Officers spoke in low, steady tones. Movements were rehearsed. The rhythm was slow, but every beat was final. Inmates on the row developed their own ways of coping. Some wrote letters obsessively, clinging to the idea that words might outlive them. Some retreated into themselves so deeply that officers described them as silent shadows, men who had already crossed an internal line long before the state carried out its sentence. Others formed unlikely friendships, not because they expected to survive, but because human connection becomes sharper when time has an expiration date. And yet, even in that place, contradictions existed. There were chaplains who saw humanity where others saw danger. There were officers who admitted that escorting a man to his final hour was something a human being never truly gets used to. The death house changed everyone, condemned, guard, or witness. For Sing Sing, these executions weren't just events. They became part of the institution's psychological DNA. Every inmate who lived within those walls knew what had happened there, and that awareness shaped how they viewed the prison, the system, and themselves. But the deeper question wasn't just how executions were carried out, it was how they reshaped the mind, both for those who watched and those who waited. Psychology of execution. Execution doesn't just end a life, It alters the mental landscape of everyone who lives in the place where it happens. At Sing Sing, the psychological impact of the death house reached far beyond its walls. Even inmates in general population, men who would never face a death sentence, spoke about feeling an invisible pressure that came from simply existing in a facility where so many final breaths had been taken. For the condemned, the psychological journey began long before their last day. Many inmates described a phenomenon officers quietly referred to as the narrowing, a mental shift where a man slowly stops thinking about the world outside and focuses solely on his immediate surroundings. Time becomes distorted. Days feel both painfully long and terrifyingly short. Some inmates tried to keep themselves anchored with routines, cleaning the same corner of the cell over and over, rereading the same letters, repeating the same prayers. These rituals weren't just habits, they were survival mechanisms. Others experienced what psychologists now call anticipatory grief, a mourning process for their own future. They grieved birthdays they wouldn't have, conversations they'd never finish, and moments that would disappear with them. A few retreated into denial, convincing themselves that a last-minute appeal would save them, even when appeals had already been exhausted. What made Sing Sing unique was how close inmates lived to the reality of execution. In some eras, men could hear the preparations, footsteps echoing, a faint hum of electricity, or the sudden stillness that settled just before an execution took place. That knowledge created a mental environment unlike any other prison in the country. For officers, the effects were equally profound. Many who worked the death house carried memories they never discussed at home. The responsibility of escorting a man in his final moments left psychological marks that no training manual ever addresses. Some spoke of a strange emotional duality, needing to be firm and composed on the outside while wrestling with the weight of the task internally. Even inmates far removed from death row changed because of Sing Sing's execution chamber. Some became fatalistic, convinced the system had already decided their worth. Others felt urgency, a desire to transform, to rise above the label that had brought them there. For many, the presence of the death house served as a constant reminder. If the prison could take a man's final breath, it could certainly take his sense of self if he wasn't careful. But not every part of Sing Sing was designed to break the mind. In a surprising twist, the same institution that carried out the state's harshest punishment also launched some of the most innovative rehabilitation programs in American history. Rehabilitation revolution. If the death house represented Sing Sing's darkest legacy, its programs for rehabilitation showed a completely different side of the institution, one that outsiders rarely expected from a maximum security prison. For decades, Sing Sing became a proving ground for some of the most unconventional ideas in criminal justice, ideas that reshaped not only inmates but the very definition of what a prison could be. The transformation began under Warden Lewis Laws, a man who refused to accept the idea that punishment alone could change human behavior. He believed that a person's mind, not just his body, had to be reshaped if he was ever going to survive beyond the gates. And so Sing Sing became home to programs no one imagined could work behind bars. The most famous of these was the prison's rehabilitation theater, where inmates acted, built sets, and worked together to create productions that were performed for the public. The stage became a sanctuary where hardened men learned vulnerability, communication, and trust, skills many hadn't practiced since childhood. Officers admitted that some inmates who were volatile on the tier became calm, disciplined performers under the spotlight. Education also became a cornerstone. Sing Sing built classrooms, libraries, and eventually partnerships with colleges. Some men earned degrees while serving long sentences, discovering intellectual talents they had never explored on the outside. In one interview, a former inmate described it as, "The first time my mind felt bigger than my cell." What made the reforms powerful wasn't just the programs themselves, it was the psychological shift they triggered. In a place defined by control, routine, and fear, the chance to build something, to learn, or to help others created a counterweight to the environment that threatened to collapse a man's identity. For some inmates, rehabilitation wasn't about preparing for release, it was about reclaiming a sense of personhood they thought they had lost forever. Yet the reforms weren't universally embraced. Some officers believed too much compassion created danger. Some inmates saw education as a trap, fearing vulnerability in a place where weakness could be exploited. A prison as old and complex as Sing Sing couldn't change without internal conflict, and every new program came with pushback, debate, and tension. Still, the rehabilitation revolution endured. And in the decades that followed, Sing Sing became a symbol not only of punishment, but of possibility, a place where men who had been defined by their worst moment could discover a different version of themselves. But no prison stays the same forever. To understand Sing Sing today, its challenges, its modern psychology, and the minds that move through it, we have to step into the present. Modern-day Sing Sing. Today, Sing Sing stands at a crossroads, part relic, part laboratory, and part battleground for the future of criminal justice. The stone walls are the same, the river still cuts past the prison like a silent witness, but the psychological reality inside the facility has shifted into something far more complex than its past could have predicted. Modern Sing Sing houses inmates from every corner of New York, men serving short bids and men serving life, men carrying trauma from childhood and men carrying trauma from the streets. What unites them is the pressure cooker environment of a maximum security prison in the 21st century. Cameras, controlled movement, strict routines, and constant awareness of who's watching. But unlike earlier eras, today's Sing Sing allows inmates more access to programs that shape their internal world. The College Initiative, for example, has created a quiet but powerful culture of discipline. Inmates who once measured themselves by toughness started measuring themselves by grades, essays, debate wins. A man who never finished high school might find himself arguing philosophy or criminal justice theory in a classroom built inside a fortress. Other programs focus on emotional literacy, group circles where men talk openly about guilt, fatherhood, anger, and the events that shaped their lives. For some, this kind of reflection feels more intimidating than any cell extraction. It forces them to peel back layers they've used for survival. Still, Sing Sing remains Sing Sing. Even with progress, the psychological tension never disappears. The noise of the blocks, the constant counting, the unspoken codes of survival, these things carve themselves into a person over time. Inmates learn to control their posture, their breathing, their tone of voice. They study the environment the same way a soldier studies a battlefield, with caution, calculation, and instinct. Officers navigate their own psychological landscape. Many grapple with burnout, hypervigilance, and the emotional weight of enforcing rules in a place where humanity and danger constantly collide. Some say the job changes their personality, others say it reveals who they always were. What makes modern Sing Sing unique is the coexistence of these two forces, progress and pressure, opportunity and confinement. Men can earn college degrees steps away from a cell that once held the condemned. They can write poetry in a place known worldwide for executions. They can rebuild a sense of identity in a place designed to strip it away. And through it all, the question remains: can an institution with such a dark past truly create light for the future? To answer that, we turn to Sing Sing's most defining truth: not the walls, not the programs, not the history, but the minds that fight to survive inside them. The mental reality that never leaves. Sing Sing is more than stone, steel, and history. It is a mirror, reflecting the extremes of human psychology back onto those who enter. Every inmate carries the weight of the past, footsteps of the condemned, echoes of decades-long rituals, and the invisible pressure of knowing that the prison has seen it all before. Yet, at the same time, each man carries the potential to redefine what it means to live inside these walls. The death house showed inmates the edge of human fear, the limits of anticipation, and the finality of choice. Rehabilitation programs proved that even in a place built for punishment, the human mind can adapt, learn, and grow. The modern Sing Sing exists at this intersection of past and present, a living laboratory where psychology, control, and opportunity collide every single day. For those who leave, the mental reality of Sing Sing does not vanish. Former inmates describe how the prison stays with them, in quiet moments, in instinctive reactions, in ways that textbooks could never prepare them for. Officers, too, carry the imprint, reminders of a place where every decision, every interaction, can shape a life in profound ways. Sing teaches a lesson few expect. Confinement shapes more than behavior. It shapes thought, identity, and resilience. It is a place where darkness and hope exist side by side, where every man who enters confronts not only the walls around him but the walls within himself. This is the mental reality of New York's historic prison. A reality that challenges, transforms, and endures, just like Sing itself. If you want to explore more stories from America's most historic prisons and understand the psychology behind the cells, hit subscribe and join us as we uncover the untold truths hidden behind the walls.